Hi everyone, it's Ren here. How are you doing, guys? Hope you're well. Sunday evening. Hope you are still having a good weekend. I had two friends over today. My mum is at her boyfriend's until tomorrow night, and I decided to invite one of my best friends and his girlfriends to the place here. My mum has a pool that we can use. The weather is extremely hot at the moment, so it's always nice to enjoy a pool. And they brought some food, and it was really nice. And it really got me thinking about this whole question about being social, um, for let's say for introverts and especially from the INFJ perspective, because I feel like it's always quite interesting how I often dread the idea of socializing. I think more in France than I do in a place like Ireland, for instance. And that in itself is an interesting question. Why do I dread socializing in France more than I do in Ireland? I think maybe it has to do with the way that French people are social. Often it tends to be a little bit more assertive. If you have a comfort zone, let's say that Southern French or Southern people, perhaps in general, are more likely to make you feel like it's being stepped on. And I think that also the fact that I have, in many ways, this temperament and in disposition that's more like Anglo-Saxon in many ways, and perhaps specifically Irish, doesn't help because there's a modesty. There's like a sort of restraint that I have that I feel like I often have to sacrifice for the sake of being social. And for this reason, the anticipation of being social, meeting people in real life, I'm not talking about being social online in this case, is always kind of painful. There's always some sort of pain which is not unbearable. Otherwise, it would be irrational of me to plan on it and plan on doing social things. There's always a kind of dread. It's never completely calm, and that includes when I'm meeting friends that I've known for a long time. It's about just welcoming people into my world. I mean, perhaps even more so when it's inviting them to my house, but even in general, just like this interaction with people that is going to require me to be a certain way, which is not entirely in line with my authentic self, but is in line with the way I am because I'm an INFJ, and INFJs are very attuned to these things, but it still takes energy from us. So it's always like this kind of weird sense of anticipation that's partly exciting and partly painful. And at the same time, what's even more interesting is it doesn't happen that every time that I am social, I actually enjoy the being social. I'm happy to say that today I had a great time. It was fantastic that they came and they made my Sunday much better, I think, than it would have been without them. But it certainly often happens that socializing can be a disappointing experience in a lot of ways. Now, in the case of the experience today, it was almost certain that it was going to go well once I passed this initial kind of anxiety, because Pierre, who's INFP by the way, he's like essentially my best friend in France. So we got on really well. We've known each other for 20 years or 21 years at this point. We're a great level of chemistry, and we know each other so well, and we laugh about the same things. And his girlfriend Eve is ESFJ. She's really, really smart, really curious, really interesting. They're both really interesting people, basically, and there's no way I was not, and kind-hearted people, and there was no way I was not going to have a good time. But it's true that we can't always pick which friends or which people are available if we want to be social in the real world, and sometimes we end up, in situations where we meet people with whom there's not a lot exchanged or at least had in common, and sometimes the experience can almost be painful and can lead us to think things like, I would have had more fun staying by myself. It would have been more productive. It wouldn't have been as much as a waste of time. And experiences like today, which again maybe are not stereotypical because they just happen to be people I know well, but there's nothing preventing us from trying to focus on people we know well, people we can trust, people that make us feel comfortable, people who understand us even though we're weirdos who don't never feel like we belong as INFJs. This has got me thinking that really at the end of the day, I wonder if, knowing that we are not particularly social creatures, or at least we're not social animals, let's say. We're social creatures because we are human beings, and we are socially oriented insofar as we are FE auxiliary users. But we are not social animals. We'll never be social animals. Perhaps an INFJ in the grip who's very stressed, or who's, might have kind of dysfunctional kinds of behavior, but we're not social animals. We're never going to be under a genuine risk of socializing too much. This is not something that's ever going to happen to us, really. Conversely, I think that it is very, very likely to happen that we end up socializing not enough. We're always in danger of socializing not enough rather than too much. And I'm really thinking that the virtues of socializing are such that really, even when we might think that in certain instances we maybe didn't have the conversation that's just, that turned out to be as interesting as we were hoping, or, perhaps we got a little bit bored, or like we were a bit awkward, people were not super good at making us feel comfortable. Perhaps it was, like sometimes, again, social events are not as satisfying as other ones. Well, you know what? I'm thinking that you could take each event individually and say, this one I really enjoyed, this one I didn't. I think that if you abstract from that and take the sheer fact of socializing, which we will never do in excess in any case, I think that the more we do it, really the better. And this is the thing, regardless of whether the event in itself turns out to have been very satisfying and very enjoyable in itself. Of course, it's always something to be preferred, but you can never be quite certain in advance whether the event is going to be, one that you enjoy. And the problem with INFJ is often that we think ahead so much, and we try to figure so much out about these events that sometimes we become kind of not traumatized, but we become kind of petrified, and we don't know whether to engage in it or not, because we're trying to predict whether we're going to have fun or not, and sometimes we just can't know, and sometimes that can, I think, stop us from just allowing ourselves to go. But the thing is, I'm starting to think that even being social without guarantee that it's going to be the most fun time of our life, for the sake of it being in the presence of other people and putting us in a place where we can have exchanges with others, where we can do things with other humans, protecting us from our own tendency to let thoughts revolve around our minds, from falling into like looping between an I and TI, and just our general tendency to just overthink and go down rabbit holes. I think that this is something that should be pursued regardless. Because I don't know about you guys, and you can tell me that, but although not all events satisfy me in and of themselves, they always serve, once I'm back on my own, or once I go back or whatever, they give my day a certain kind of relief, which creates more urgency and more meaning for the times that I'm on my own again, before or after, while I'm anticipating, or when I'm kind of happy to be back on my own. Rather than like spending an entire day on my own, which feels like sometimes it's a bit formless, it ensures that I'm not under the dread of socializing, but at the same time, it deprives me of this great opportunity to, again, is healthy, keeps you in touch with yourself, even though you're always probably going to be a little bit outside yourself when you socialize, because that's just being INFJ. But it allows you to stay in touch with yourself, and to be with others has such a therapeutic dimension to it. Then when I'm back on my own, I'm always more excited and more positive and forward-looking than if I had not socialized. And that's regardless of the socializing itself and its quality. But let me know in the comments what you think, guys. Those were just some quick thoughts on socializing, and I'm curious to know what you think. See you soon.